The hands are flying up. I can see a queue right away. Yeah. Do you have a mic? Are you going to send a mic round?
I don't have a microphone, but I can speak quite loudly. Yeah. Is that okay for everyone? Yes. Go on.
So you probably all know this quote. The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter.
Winston Churchill.
Of course. Which is kind of surprising. I think that's kind of where it all starts, is that the education's, we're going to have the interaction with technology whether we love it or not anyway. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is to actually educate at a younger age most of the electorate in order to make informed, or at least reasonably more informed decisions. I'm just throwing that out there because if you're uninformed at age 35, 40, and then you're more reactionary or emotional about what you're being told, you need a system that helps people make more informed judgment through fake news or whatever information is coming at them.
Yeah. Okay, can I ask another little survey question for you guys? How many of you think that Facebook adverts or Cambridge Analytica somehow was important or swung the election for Donald Trump, or indeed the Brexit vote? Okay, decent few of you, yeah, quite a few of you. How many of you feel like you've ever been influenced by a Facebook advert to change how you vote? Hardly anyone. Everyone thinks someone else is getting influenced, but not them. It's a weird thing. I mean, it's quite a well-established phenomenon, actually. Like, these people are misinformation and ill-informed. I mean, not me. I mean, I know what's going on. And that's a risk, because there's been quite a few, and I agree with you entirely, like the point that you're making. I mean, civic education, the way I see it, is we used to be able to rely on gatekeepers to help us make sense of the world, and maybe that wasn't perfect, but people in positions of expertise, and then suddenly you're just overwhelmed. You're sort of your own editor and your own gatekeeper, and 16-year-olds need to understand copyright law and libel law, and I mean, I feel very sorry for young people, although older people are more likely to believe fake news than younger people. I think the risk for younger people is that they're too sceptical, nothing's to be trusted, everything. I don't think they're gullible, I think it's the opposite. I think what they need to do is we need to recreate a system of epistemology. Like, why do you trust one thing over another? Not nothing's trusted, everything's a lie. So we've got slightly different problems. But surveys have also found that more highly educated people have a more inaccurate view of their political opponents than less educated people. They caricature their opponents more. So we probably need a bit of humility as well, because we are very, very good at caricaturing the other side. I'm assuming most people are quite liberal. Very, very good at finding intellectual rationalizations to caricature the other side more than they might caricature us. So some humility on our side, I think, is quite important.
I agree, and that also will backfire, of course. I mean, when you call people deplorables for not agreeing with you, which will happen, then that really kind of just consolidates the opinion and closes down engagement. The more you then get polar, the whole thing becomes more and more polarized.
Yeah,
it doesn't help.
No, but we think what we can do, like what's your role in that? I think all of us, me included, I am very good at pointing the finger at all the things other people do, and then I steam into an online argument and realise I'm stirring this up. I can't tell you, because the first book I wrote was called The Darknet. It was all about the really, really dark internet subcultures. I spent a lot of time on all the worst places online, and it's like the internet trolls, the online neo-Nazis, the people in self-harm forums. They're never how you think they are in real life. Never. Because I went to meet them in person, that was the point. And they were never like you'd imagine them. But you build people up online and how they are, and you misunderstand what their lives are really about. We do it to them, they do it to us. I'm not saying it, everyone's doing it, basically.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for that dystopian vision of Jacob Riggs' mug in my fridge.
It could be Caroline Lucas. If you haven't been using your smart bin to recycle, it'll be Caroline Lucas. Everyone's doing it.
Any of them, as dystopian, frankly. And I too have spent much time in the dark recesses of the net. Stormfront used to be great fun. for those of us who would be prepared to either troll or to read.
Yeah.
I used to do that for years, actually. I probably was one of my favourite websites. But I really wanted to talk about this idea and just kind of slightly, because I think at the moment, the real thing at the moment is this whole issue about political speech and platforms like Twitter, Facebook, etc. Jack seems to have taken a position where, okay, we're going to ban all political advertising, but to me the problem with that is, how do you define what is political? I don't see how it's possible for them really, in the end, to do that without there being some kind of question marks about whether it was Evian who were advertising their water. That's a political question.
Yeah.
Bottled water is a political question, right? So what are you going to do then? Are you going to be banning Evian?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be within the orbit of what he's talking about. So I think it's a bit of a nonsense, and it's going to be ultimately unsustainable for them to do that. But similarly with Facebook, what I found even more troubling is this idea that all of a sudden people want Mark Zuckerberg to be the arbiter of speech, of what we can and can't say on the platform.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's a public utility, or public square argument, really, because that's what Facebook has become. And there are going to be things on the public square that you're not going to like. In the same way, if you go on a Sunday to Hyde Park Corner, there are going to be things said that you're not going to like to hear, okay? But the idea of saying to people, you can't say what you want to say at Speaker's Corner seems to me to be absurd. So actually, I think...
Speaker's Corner doesn't have a window into your living room.
Yes, regardless of whether it has well, it does actually, because there are plenty of videos on YouTube from Speaker's Corner. So yes, it does.
But but that's the thing. It's YouTube.
Yeah.
And I think
and I'm talking about Facebook. Could I finish my point?
Okay.
All right. Thank you. So what I feel is that
I'm not getting involved.
there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are very angry about what's happened with Trump. Very angry about what's happened with Brexit and so on, and they're looking to try and find solutions. But quite honestly, we're looking to the wrong people to provide those solutions. Mark Zuckerberg is not the guy. Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg is not the watcher. I'm sorry, I do not want to live in a world where Mark Zuckerberg is the watcher. Okay, and from my point of view, I think this is a problem, a general failure on the left that goes back many years, when no platforming became a thing, where rather than saying to someone, oh, actually, your views are idiotic and here's why, what you do is you just ban them. And as if somehow by banning them, their arguments, their discourses disappear. It's like children. If you go like that, then suddenly, the thing isn't there. It's there. So what you have to do is engage with it, not sort of run away or try and find somebody who's going to be Big Daddy, who's going to ban this and that. And anyway, from what I understand with what Facebook has been doing, they've got people like Daily Caller who are fact checkers for them. All kinds of ridiculous, like Drudge Report and all the rest of it. So, in the end, it's just going to become a mess. So, I mean, I don't know what your view is on that.
Yeah,
I just think that
maybe it's an interesting point. Yeah. Not one I disagree with entirely at all. I've got a lot of sympathy with what you're saying there, and I'll come back to this. But maybe you could get another couple of views, because I think there might be some people that disagree with what you say, and we can get them. And we'll disagree respectfully with what you say.
On that topic, though, this week there was front page of a lot of the newspapers was that more than half the population of university students preferred to be censored than to have free speech. And I think that's
worrying.
Exactly. That's what I mean, and that's the direction that's going in.
You had a slightly different take on it. So what are you?
I don't necessarily disagree. I just have a different take on it. In that, I think the difference. Mark Zuckerberg seems to say this is what Facebook is. Some of the authorities or some of the people who don't agree with him say it's something else. So I feel like it was made as this kind of social media platform, and I do agree that I think it's now become something else. So it should there should be some synchronization between the rule of law and the way it's kind of looked at. But I think because basically the moment when you can, if we can have kind of opposing views here, that's one thing. But I think the moment when it's accessible to 10 million people, or 5 or less or more, I think it's something else. And I don't think we've kind of agreed on that overall.
Yeah. You, madam, maybe because you already spoke, sir. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah.
My arm is longer.
Okay.
Actually, I want to go back to your original point, and I'll open my question by saying I've worked at the center of politics as not the current president's economic advisor, but I have been an economic advisor to a previous president.
Can you say which one?
George W.
All right.
And also, I now manufacture autonomous vehicles.
I know who you are.
Oh,
I
you
think.
do?
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Pippa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know who you are.
Oh, well, so I want to go back to the original point that I think this conversation about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook is a little bit of a red herring in the sense that what we're all doing is giving away very personal data constantly over multiple channels. And what Cambridge Analytica had was so minor. All they had were the Facebook likes. But now you can acquire through the auction process on the internet extremely deep data, way beyond that, about every individual. And what I hear everywhere is people say, I have nothing to hide. But the reality is the bank is already buying this data and discerning through your spending patterns and your spouse's when the divorce is coming and driving down the credit limit of the lower earning partner in anticipation of this event. And the HR department won't interview you because they've seen that you order ice cream on a Thursday night at 11 p.m., which the algorithms say means you're not emotionally stable. So what I'm concerned about is this, you know what I mean? Like, this is what the correlation of the algorithms do. So I'm super interested in your argument on what I'm saying is actually maybe we get a little lost talking about Facebook. The bigger issue is the constant revelations that we voluntarily give by emitting data and being unconscious of it, and how that data is used against us without any knowledge.
Yeah, but you can also purposely disrupt that.
That's what I'm saying. How do we do that?
People do that all the time, purposely disrupt that.
Yeah.
You know, say that you like something when you really don't.
You know what? Can I just say on that? Oh no, I know that's on my book I've written about some of this stuff. I have 20 ideas about things you can do, and one of them is to go around liking things you don't like. Just warning people in advance that you're about to do it, so they don't think you suddenly like the EDL or whatever. But just trying to mess up. And I can imagine, and that's the sort of. To me, sort of the duty of a citizen now to do those kinds of things, to up your privacy settings, to check this. Sometimes you will give some data away in exchange for something, obviously, but there are lots of easy things you can do to minimise that. Is as much of a duty on you as voting in terms of your being a good citizen, because we're building a strange techno infrastructure here, and we don't know who we might elect in 20 years' time and what they might do with what we've put online. That's the thing that I always think back to. No one imagined when in the Netherlands they were creating identity cards with addresses and ethnicity on to help, facilitate the payment of certain social welfares, that at some point the Nazis would come in and take all of that and then use it in a totally different way. So, how can we imagine, what are we going to, who's going to be our president or prime minister in 30 years' time, the way we're going? So that's why I think it is very, very important. And I agree, Cambridge Analytica, they didn't just have Facebook likes, though. They did have 5,000 data points legally acquired from the data brokerage companies. People forget about that. 99.9% of what they did was legal. It was all done in accordance with what every digital advertising company does. Purchase data to profile people. And so that's why I do think it is better to think ahead, like 10 years, 20 years, what are we building? What do we do now? And some of it's going to be that. And I'm not sure if I can answer the question, like what do we do in terms of, Mark Zuckerberg being the arbiter of what we should say, and But to me, the basic problem is that Facebook has de facto become the public square, but it is still a private company.
Yeah, and that's my
That's
point.
it. That's the problem, isn't it? In a nutshell, because he can decide for advertising purposes, and they're an advertising company, not really a tech company. I mean, that is 90% of their revenue.
No, I agree
they
with
can say, we don't have to have you on our platform. It's not our responsibility. It's our server. Get off if you don't like our rules. So,
well, I think there has to be some mechanism whereby they it's like, as long as I pay my bill, I can't be denied gas from the gas company, right? Because it's a public utility. It doesn't matter it's irrelevant whether or not I'm a fascist or a progressive liberal or anything else. I can still pay. As long as I've got the money and I don't run up a debt on my bill, I can get my gas or my electric or whatever, or my Vodafone or whatever it is. And I think Facebook has to be looked at in that sort of way, where it is a public utility. How you do that in the law in the United States in terms of like statute or whatever, or how you can change that to make it kind of public-private or whatever, I don't know the ins and outs, but I think that must happen. Otherwise we're going into a very dangerous territory.
Or we try other platforms. I mean, there is a big wave of... I know, absolutely, but the only way you're going to create other platforms is by using other platforms. I mean, I don't know if anyone has ever, like I often do, every 6 months or so, I say, I'm really worried about Google. I mean, I love Google. I mean, I literally wouldn't be here without Google. I'd still be cycling around somewhere. But worried about what Google will become in 10 years and the sort of concentration of power. And so I think, I'm not going to use Google anymore. I'm going to use DuckDuckGo or one of these other search engines. And then I'd set that as my default browser and stuff. And then I search for something and it can't find it, and I go back to Google again. I mean, everyone does it.
Yeah, maps.
But you don't need to do everything. You can just do little things. You can just use it sometimes, and you can just sort of take a sort of thoughtful approach to your online life and realise it does have implications. I don't vote because I think it's going to make any difference in my constituency. I vote because I see it as a duty as a citizen. And I think the same thing about some of our behaviour here. I know I can't bring down Facebook by messing up my likes or by not using Google or whatever, but I still think it's a duty to do that, to try to create a slightly more... And the same thing is true of our attention span. I mean, I'm guessing you're like me, that you think your attention span has been reduced somewhat in the last 10 years or so. Most of us probably have. That's very bad for politics, because we can't deal with complicated ideas in the same way, because we can't focus and think about them deeply. We just scream at each other, because that's far easier and a sort of shortcut to feeling good about yourself most of the time. And that's not good for any of us. So I think about attention as being such a valuable resource when you live in an attention economy, and something that you need to work on as a good citizen is supposed to always think about their duties, as reading the newspapers, joining the neighbourhood watch and the political party. Your attention is as important as any of those things.
I just wanted to say thank you, and I love your work, because on the one hand it makes me...
Did everyone hear that? I'm not sure if you're at the back. She loves my work. And just far away.
Because on the one hand it makes me engage in like in the daily things I should be engaging with, like politics and power and democracy. But then on the other hand, you make me think about the debates that I'd be having when I was at school, like about what, if anything, can we know, and do we have free will, and all these things. So it's interesting, but also really scary as well. I wanted to know whether you thought, because we've always been subject to propaganda, and surely it was worse if you kind of grow up in an authoritarian state, or not even an authoritarian state, but that there's kind of, you just have the government and they're the ones putting the posters up all the time. Surely that's worse than having access to so many different views and having these big kind of governments and corporations putting money behind things.
It's worse, but it's also different. I mean, if you think about the possibilities for propaganda now in somewhere like China, I mean, we all thought that China would democratize with the internet, and we're very naive and gullible about it. And if you speak to most Chinese citizens who are sort of democrats and ask them whether the internet is helping their cause or not, I mean, they'll all say no, it's not. It's not helping it at all. And as for the potential of digital surveillance and what that's going to do, so it's different, but I'm not sure that it's that much worse back in the day than it is now, or that it could potentially be in the next 5 to 10 years in those places. But these are especially threats to existing democracies. And again, I do think a better way of thinking about it is not to say it's worse or better, but it's different. It's re-emerging in different ways, in ways we're not really used to. You know, I mean, the idea now is that you don't actually, whether it's in dictatorships or in democracy, if you want to propagandize to people, you don't try and censor and push ideas out. You flood with nonsense so people aren't interested in the difference between truth and reality. And that's different, and it requires a different approach. But the impulse of powerful people to control you and to get their ways the same, that hasn't been affected. So I always think about it as just like old human behaviours coming through in slightly different ways is a better way to think about it.
And when you speak about the incompatibility problem between technology and like political institutions, do you see a way that it can, do you see like a practical way, like what are the biggest, so you have the smaller changes we need to be making daily to protect our privacy, but what are the biggest shifts that we need to be working towards?
Like bigger, so certain sort of specific rules or change, like laws, things like that
and
we
like,
can do.
Who's working on this? Is any apart from you?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people working on this actually, and to be honest, over the last couple of years, look at you've all come here. I mean, 3 or 5 years ago, this was not something people cared that much about, and it does now. And you can see politicians starting to talk about it. So you can see a massive change in opinion about this, which is brilliant. Alexander Nix at Cambridge Analytica has done more for the cause of privacy and data rights than almost anyone else. I mean, he really has. Him and Edward Snowden are the two people that have done more than anyone else. So, am I on Snowden's or Nix's? No, I'm not on Nix. I wish I was on Nix's payroll. Yeah, I'm sure he's raking it in. No. Have done, although a weird story for you, Cambridge Analytica and my literary agent were in the same building. How about that? Conspiracy theory. So I think there are certainly certain rules. So forget about the things that each of us can do, because I've talked a little bit about attention and, you know, this GDPR thing. You remember who cared about boring old privacy laws? And then suddenly everyone knows about this GDPR. I mean, that's an amazing thing. And probably most of your experience with GDPR is getting loads of emails saying, would you like to stay subscribed to this email list, and then ignoring it. And that's basically been it. But I hope that people will start to try to enforce the rights they have under that. You know, you have the right to data portability. You can go to the big tech companies and say, give me all the data that you've got about me, and I'm going to take it elsewhere and try and sell it to them. Now, no one's going to do that individually, but if companies turn up and say they'll do it for you and collate lots of different people's data together, something can happen. You know, like when you try to get money back from a flight that was delayed or something like that, and companies will be the intermediary for you because they know you can't bother to do it. I can see something like that in the next 5 years for data rights, and when it's easy to do, people will do it. Convenience is like the great motivator. And I can see those things actually happening. So there's a lot that we can, each of us, do. But I think there are some simple laws. You mentioned about what is a political ad, like how do we ban political ads? I don't actually think we should ban political ads for that reason partly. But what is a political... I mean, and everything is becoming more politicised now, so there's little that's not political, which is a separate worry. But what would be better, I think, would be to... for every political party would have to publish every advert that they run, the groups they targeted, and sort of how they targeted them. And so you could just see what they were doing, and journalists would be able to go through it, and that would keep them in check. So they wouldn't run, like we think that Trump ran, some of these sort of dark voter suppression ads targeting black communities in America with ads about Hillary Clinton, about things that she'd said 10 years ago about young black, which I don't even know whether it was true or not, but some adverts that she about, like, it was basically about suppressing the vote, something about predators, yeah. So and I mean the other, so I would rather that the way you try to deal with this was to accept that it will happen, but you try to bring some transparency to it, and then journalists and regulators could try to, I guess, keep the politicians a bit more honest. That's our best chance. But that does raise a slightly separate question about one of the things that I think is a real problem today is how everyone can be strung up for something that they said 10 or 15 years ago. I am so grateful when I was a teenager there was no Facebook. The things I said, I mean, I think back at it now and cringe. And we've got to probably as a society get a bit more understanding about the fact people do stupid things, make mistakes, and they apologise for it and move on. And you've seen it now, politicians all employ people to rake through old posts to then discredit them. And all it does is to create the feeling that everyone's a hypocrite, no one's acting in good faith, and that's so destructive to democracy. You've got to have some trust in people.
And I think in society in general, seems like we fall into a state of complete mistrust, and we don't trust anyone, and that's so disempowering. Because with no trust in any institution, it's very hard to kind of gather any will to do anything about it. Then you have people just not voting whatsoever. But I just had a thought when you were speaking, and it's that I personally rely so much on other people to tell me things. So I'll read like The Guardian, for example, and they'll kind of feed these ideas into me, and it's great. But because I'm overwhelmed by information and just by life in general, I don't really take the time to actually go and read like the Conservative manifesto and then the Labour manifesto, and actually just dedicate that time. Instead, I'm reading a bit about something I don't even care about, and then a bit about something else I really don't care about, and I just need to. It's like, I think
what would be an interesting thing to do? A bit like what you were saying, how you go on the Stormfront website and sort of troll them.
What is that?
Stormfront is neo-Nazi. Like, it was one of the first neo-Nazi bulletin board website, and it was one of the interesting things about technology is outsiders, radical groups, extreme groups are very often early adopters of any new technology. So for a long time, Stormfront had the biggest bulletin board, which was like an early website, of any political movement. I mean, and it was very, very popular. Yeah, and you have a unique opportunity now to actually see the other side, how the other side thinks, what they read, I wish we could. And I'm not saying you would go to Stormfront and think, oh, they've got a point, because they're really out there, obviously. But you could actually go onto websites that could design for you a kind of information experience about how someone who's very different from you sees the world, the information they get, the things they receive. Not that you would then agree with them necessarily, but you'd see maybe how they've got to where they've got to. And it's very easy to do. What a unique opportunity we have to understand and see the information worlds of other people. I still don't think we really take advantage of that. All we see is someone we disagree with sharing an article we disagree with, and we just think they're dangerous and mad and stupid and fascist or whatever it happens to be, or Marxist, whatever. So,
I don't think it's just. Oh, sorry. Tracy.
Yeah, you go.
Well, I was just going to say that it's not just technology, it's also a lot of how the world is working right now in general, whether it's the food industry or any other kind of consumer-based industry that is often multinational, has no accountability to any one place or any one person. There's so much in the chain that's hidden and concealed, whether it's slavery or whether it's GM, or there's ecocide, and it's just this idea of growth, and where things are put only with profit as the main goal. So this is what's the problem with tech. It's a problem with the food industry too, and so then there's, on the other hand, these things like blockchain emerging, where there's no single ownership, but again, no accountability. Also, and like, do you see blockchain and these other sort of similar technologies as something that can provide hope because they're not owned by one person, or not?
How many people in this room can honestly say they understand really what a blockchain is? Really, truthfully.
What is a blockchain?
Yeah. 3 or 4 people, yeah. It's hard,
really
it's difficult, it's really complicated. Well, in some ways it's very simple, and in other ways it's very complicated. You've heard of Bitcoin. This digital cash, basically. So essentially a blockchain is like someone explained it to me once as a massive Google Docs that is ad-only. It's a really simple way of thinking about it. It's like a decentralized, distributed database that's chronologically ordered, and you cannot tamper with historic entries. Okay, so it sounds like, okay, it's a sort of, so what? What does that mean? But it actually maybe means quite a lot, because it means you can start showing, with Bitcoin, for example, you can prove how much everyone's got in their Bitcoin wallet, because you can see every transaction that's ever been made and no one person can manipulate it. So suddenly a decentralized digital cash is possible. That's why everyone's buzzing about it, because people have been trying to do this for a long time and they've never worked out how to do it. And now everyone's thinking about, what about other possibilities of blockchain? Because now you could have a supply chain system which is really transparent, and you can see how diamonds are made and where they're made, and you can sort of follow them through this database because people can't hide it. The reality about blockchain, I don't know if anyone's heard the Missing Crypto Queen podcast that I've been working on. I mean, it's a good example though of when you make a technology and everyone's hyped up and everyone thinks it's going to save the world. Scammers and con artists come steaming in and start using all this amazing language, and no one understands the tech and everyone gets ripped off, which is what's happened with these fake cryptocurrencies. So blockchain could be interesting, but if you think about it, let's take the supply chain example. You're going to have a chronological database proving that a diamond was mined here ethically, and then it was, and it was shipped here ethically, and it's on the database, so you can check it. But how do you know people haven't just made up what they've put on the database? You're still left with the same problem, which is, do you really trust that what's on this amazing database is truthful? Because people will put lies on there, and then you can't delete them because they're on this unalterable, chronologically ordered, distributed, ad-only ledger. So I think and people have been talking about the ways that blockchain is going to solve everything. Everything can be fixed with world peace, and poverty can be fixed with blockchain. And there's too much hype about it. But there are, I think, some interesting uses. I think, you remember I said about putting political ads on a database that everyone could see? I think you could do that on a blockchain database, actually. You could show when the ads were run. You couldn't then go back and delete the old ads, and people could look at them. Pretty cool. Now, they might lie with the ones they put on there, so you've got to regulate that. So I don't think it solves every trust problem in the world, but it is interesting.
Quick thing about the blockchain. Obviously, it's got a lot of flaws and areas where it can be taken over by people with bad intentions. But relatively to our centralized, globalized economy, surely it can kind of offer something a little bit better without inequality.
Yeah, but inequality. I mean, do you know what proportion of people own 90% of the Bitcoin? I mean, it's more unequal than Brazil. Bitcoin. It's not this amazing. I mean, because it depends on computing power, and then the biggest people have the best computing power, and the early adopters who bought them all make all the wealth, and has some elements almost of a Ponzi scheme. I don't think Bitcoin's a Ponzi scheme at all, because it doesn't have a lot of the other traits, but I don't know whether it can really solve things like inequality. And then there's the danger that the Chinese government will introduce a cryptocurrency of its own, so it can monitor every single transaction between every single citizen, which would be the opposite of what the designers wanted. But old questions of power and influence will determine where this technology goes. So I'm sort of hopeful about it. I see lots of interesting opportunities, but I'm not going to put all my eggs in the blockchain basket. It's a terrible analogy.
See, GDPR actually just protects us as a trading bloc against the infiltration of Chinese or American powers. And it's not perceived like that, but I think that's quite true. It allows us to stand up as Europeans and say, actually, we have analysed this and we've started to make strides. And it's not just about blocking, protecting your data for that company 1, company 2, company 3. It changes us into an economic bloc.
Yeah. Good point.
So, William Casey, director of the CIA in 1981, said, "We will know when our program of disinformation has succeeded when everything that Americans believe is false." And George Orwell said that truth is tyranny in an empire of lies. So we have Julian Assange, who basically has, proved to be the safest kind of guard for whistleblowers to put their information without their identity being exposed. And actually now, a lot of the newspapers have sort of Dropbox to make it quite safe for whistleblowers. So it seems to me that Julian has helped us, the public, shine the light on our state and our corporations and their trade agreements. And I wanted to know what you thought about the fact that unless we all stand up and support this guy and recognize that the smears that have been put on him are because he is a voice against the state. So that is very common that you get labelled that you've raped or that you smear shit on the wall, or this sort of thing has been smear after smear. So my ask for you, last Friday the Union of Journalists recognised that we have to support Julian. He shouldn't be extradited to America. So I just wondered what you and your kind of journalists that you know and what you personally think would happen to your future if you're challenging and shining the light on what the state wants us to be and believe.
I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of Julian Assange for different reasons. I think he's done some good things. I've read through all of his old cypherpunk years posts. He was a hardline libertarian. I'd really rather not get into a discussion about the legal situation that he's in, because I feel like I don't know enough about the case. The general principle of being able to, for example, have whistleblown material hosted on darknet sites or using Tor browsers to do that is something that, with every passing year, I think is more and more important. Julian Assange has done things to help push that forward. WikiLeaks has also done a lot of things that I don't like, that I think is quite irresponsible and unhelpful. But that doesn't mean I don't see the value in other aspects of either him or things that people like him, other cypherpunks, other whistleblowers have done. So that's where I'd rather leave it.
So what about, do you think he should be extradited to
No, it's not really something I
Really?
feel qualified enough to comment on.
So you really don't give a damn if he gets extradited to the
No,
USA?
it's not that. It's more that I don't feel like I'm sufficiently informed about all the different parts of that case to make a good judgment on it. That's all. A lot of people will just say what, without really. I feel like you've got to really be informed to make a judgment.
As far as democracy and all that goes, I don't know if you are interested, but in Ireland they have this general election coming up, and you have the Unionists and the Nationalists coming out then with their both sides, like Sinn Féin or the DUP, and then you have the back and deeper than that, you have the UVS or the IRA. The IRA remaining silent, but the UVF trying to tar that if they're voted into the Sinn Féin party that there will be bloodshed again and stuff like that, trying to put us back in history. And as far as I can see, it falls down to, I know it's the union or whatever it is, but it falls down to the reins of this leading this English language that we speak, as such as the royal family. Why don't they speaking on what the politics is saying in Ireland, yet there's so little news coverage in this part of the UK as such. There's nothing said, but on the Irish news it's on all the time, and as far as I can see it's just going to be a mess. What's your views on the
You're trying to ask me extremely difficult questions here, guys, I feel unqualified to talk about those things. I'm very hesitant to sort of. I have a big analysis about just democracy and how certain things are not working or are working, and what digital technology is doing to that, and the big problems we're going to face. But I try and stay a little bit away from the specific political questions, because everything I've ever done, everything I've ever worked on, I've always realised that until you get into the nitty-gritty of something, really study it, speak to the people, spend a lot of time on it, you don't really know what you're talking about. So something as detailed as that, something as detailed as what you've said, I feel like I just give some loose rubbish answer that just wouldn't be adequate. So Yeah. I keep my loose, inadequate answers for vague subjects that are.
I'm from the medical world, and we've been subjected to advertising by drug companies with very powerful people, clever statisticians, and the process of medical professionals working out whether something is true or not, or good or bad. You go through a learning process of critical reading, and people have to publish their sources. What I've noticed about young people is that they are starting to find themselves having to go to, even in the simplest of cases, to sites like Snopes or various sort of fact-checking websites and looking for financial drives to the publishers of article A or B. And I feel optimistic that actually the public are going to get better. And as you said, what you said about Winston Churchill and 5 minutes with the public, I think that will change. And I'm optimistic that young people will be trained to think critically and appraise what they're being fed, see what the motives of the people feeding that information are, and make better decisions.
Yeah, I hope so. And I'm not entirely pessimistic. I don't think it's impossible to do.
Well, in the medical world, it's part of training. And so that's possibly a starting point.
But I just recognise that it's very hard for teachers to be able to teach this stuff, given the speed with which it's all changed suddenly. I mean, the information world we live in now is just so different from the one that teachers tended to grow up in.
But isn't education becoming dispersed as we critically appraise our friends and colleagues?
I mean, maybe.
And what they're saying.
Maybe. I mean, but I spend a lot of time in schools, and I just see how hard it is for them. I mean, there are some simple things you can do. There are a lot of firewalls at schools, so they don't allow in the classroom any use of to be able to access any internet, or some of them any internet sites at all, which to me is ridiculous, because I don't quite know how you can truly teach about how you navigate information without doing it actually on the platforms that kids are using. The reason I wrote the book The Darknet is because I was spending a lot of time in these weird forums, and no teachers and no parents even knew they existed. Yeah. And it was where these kids were spending their whole lives. And I thought, it's just so ridiculous that the teachers don't even know about them, and it's embarrassing. I gave a talk to 150 head teachers about the Darknet, and told them about what it's like, how it works, and all the rest of it. And they all came up to me afterwards, I'm so shocked, I can't believe this. And then one 17-year-old came up to me and said, basically, your talk was lame. You don't even know what you're talking about is half the story. And I was like, geez, even I don't know what's really going on. That is a pretty weird inequality. It's always existed to some extent, but I think it's really got worse. I'd love to see technology companies designing a lot more educational material so that teachers can find it easier to teach some of this stuff. But I think there's also specific new things you've got to learn. I genuinely feel like the ability to concentrate and focus is a skill that is a sort of a baseline skill for everyone. That you can't really have any critical thinking or appraising differing statistical approaches unless you can concentrate on things and focus on them. And I don't know whether we teach people how to do that, because we never really had to teach them how to. It feels like you are now up against some of the smartest minds in the world and this industrial scale distraction machine, and I don't see us teaching those things. That's why I'm in favour of some kind of ban in schools for smartphones, while allowing the teachers to go online for the classes so kids can see, so you can actually visit. I mean, I don't know whether I would say kids should visit the Darknet in the classroom, but you should be giving classes in the context of real life Instagram stories and what it means and how you analyse it and stuff like that. So it's not impossible. We can do all of those things. I guess I see constantly there's a big gap still that we haven't quite crossed.
Well, Facebook said that they were going to try to add some sort of parameter to any news item as to how valid it was and whether it was biased and whether it was there was something about that. I can't describe it exactly, but there was a move towards
a bit of fact checking stuff they were going to do.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And at least some sort of accountability.
Yeah. But even with that, and it's a bit like with the blockchain thing, because in this podcast I did, I explained to my mum about blockchain, tried to see if she understood it, and it was a little thing we did, and but she was thinking like, but why would I trust that? I mean, why? So it's a decentralized, encrypted, mathematically guaranteed. She said, but why would I trust that thing over the other thing? It's going to be the same with the sort of fact checking on Facebook. Well, why should I trust Facebook? Why do I? Fundamentally, basic questions of propaganda, sort of manipulation, how people try to control you with a digital edge to it. Old school used to be like 1 hour a week. I think it's like 6 hours a week now. It should be, because it's the core of so much of how we live our lives. So we basically, if I can summarise it very briefly, we don't teach media literacy sufficiently, either in quality or quantity.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, if there is one.
You mentioned before about how journalists can analyse information and what's happening. Whenever I look at articles that people post on Facebook, say The Guardian, to pop up, we need to continue this good work, and obviously you're not getting the same revenue because you don't like papers the same. Have you noticed, because of the reader apathy that people are buying papers, it's hard for journalists to do those arbitrary performances?
The problem with journalism, I think, there's two things that I think are mostly happening. One is this blurring between opinion and news reporting, which drives me wild. I never call myself a journalist because I feel like I'm not a journalist. I write books and things, and it's a lot cheaper to do opinion than news reporting, because all you got to do is pay someone to write 800 words, and it's easy and quick. And there are loads of very talented graduates coming out of university who are 22 and they desperately just want to get pieces, and they'll take 80 quid to do it, and you can just create loads of content. And that is very frustrating indeed. But the real problem with journalism, I think the big newspapers should be okay if they continue to charge for content and they do subscription models. And I don't think all is lost. I think for the local newspapers, it's a catastrophe. Disaster. So hard to be able to make money in this world. Who wants to read your poorly staffed local newspaper about the local news? Who's going to pay for that when you're competing against the big boys? So that's a problem, because the best journalists that I know all went through local newspapers first. That was like their training ground. So I worry that we might create a generation of journalists that haven't gone through the local like this kind of knocking on doors, chasing down the local authorities. And that's a real problem for local accountability. They reckon with Grenfell, the Kensington and Chelsea Gazette, I can't remember the name of the local paper. Battersea News. I'm sure it was Kensington something. It was shut down 2 or 3 years. Or no, wasn't they shut down? They reduced a lot of their staff. And one of the staff they removed was someone that basically used to investigate these kinds of things. Like was investigating when local tenants felt like the local council wasn't, working as they should have done. No big newspaper's going to be bothered with those stories, but it has such a big impact on people's lives. And that journalist might have been able to raise awareness about the Grenfell Action Group complaining constantly about the non-fireproof cladding, but no one did it, because no one was paying for it. So I think the problem's it's at the local level. I don't really have an answer for that. I can imagine we might actually get to a point someday where governments start essentially subsidising or paying for local newspapers because they think it's important for democracy. Then you're going to get into other problems about propaganda and stuff. So we've got to figure out how to design that. But it's the only. I think we're going to end up there.
It's a really interesting point, and I think it's something that I see like as part of my generation, that it's like I feel like a lot of us, and personally as well, I'm becoming maybe in a way less knowledgeable but more opinionated, and a lot of that is because I'll just skim headlines and I won't really read, and I know what I care about, and that's the environment, and that's the one thing that I focus on. But like I read your article about how social media is making us all fascists, and I thought it was at first a bit.
It's more subtle than there is a subtlety in that argument.
Well, but you need a big headline to make me read it. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But
That's the difference, actually. But people have always said, liberals have always read The Guardian, conservatives have already read The Telegraph. What's the difference to today? But the difference is you can tailor your news consumption according to subject matter. So you can become obsessed about a subject. You might have read The Guardian as a liberal, but you read 10 or 15 different subjects, whereas now you can just do nothing but consume news to do with your thing. And this is what Tommy Robinson and people like him do. All they read is about Islam. It's the only thing. So you become a complete fanatic. And then what happens is you actually become quite knowledgeable on the subject. And then a journalist at the BBC tries to hold you to account with their clever questions, but they don't know what they're talking about, these generalist journalists, and you, the radical, can take them apart. And it doesn't matter whether you're part of the Green movement or whether you're part of the radical right. You're more knowledgeable because you become obsessed over one subject. That is actually a bit unhealthy, even if you love the subject, because you can just become kind of just in this zone and nothing else matters and everything else is a distraction. And that's the difference between now and 20 years ago. So it's the same human tendency, but it can be turbocharged by like extreme personalization of content.
Yeah, thank you. Before we wrap up, I'd like to hear what because you're doing the podcast. It isn't finished yet.
The Missing Crypto Queen, available on BBC
so
Sounds
good.
or wherever
It's
you get your
amazing.
podcasts.
If you start listening to it, you'll listen to it all.
But I'd like to hear what your next steps are and any new books or.
So this podcast, basically, I'm not going to give it away because I'm guessing most of you haven't heard it, but it's like a thriller looking for this woman who's been missing for 2 years, who created a fake cryptocurrency that raised 4 billion euros from people all around the world, and she's still on the run. And we tried to find her. I mean, immediately that's like, what a crazy story. It's like Bernie Madoff plus the Fire Festival plus cryptocurrency. I mean, it's the weirdest thing. So I'm just trying to...
Fiction.
No, it's non-fiction. It's actually happening. And I'm just trying to write... All I want to do really is write these stories about technology that are about the impact on people's lives and like human stories, because the minute you start writing about technology and the technicalities of blockchain, 90% of people, their eyes glaze over, and then the people who are in charge of that get to make all the decisions about it. So my way of thinking about it is if you can tell stories that are compelling or interesting about it, other people will be engaged, and then you won't just leave it to the technologists to make all the decisions because it's far too important to be left to them. People complain all the time about how politicians don't get tech. Most technologists don't get politics either, and it's just as annoying. And so if you can write stories that can get non-technologists into the subject of technology, I think that's really good. So I'm just going to carry on with that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
I can't give it away. It's a dramatic. You've got to keep listening. And I'm not going to give you that. And yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Sorry again, everyone, for being delayed. Thank you for being patient. Thanks for being patient.